These are my flowers. Well, actually, no, these are my flowers. And in this episode of Groove Builders, I'm going to be showing you how to design and 3D print your very own spacers, inserts, and flower pots. Roll the intro. Hey everyone, and welcome to Groove Builders, the show where we create together. I'm your host, Disorderly Cone. Let's go ahead and get started by jumping into Tinkercad. Now, this is a free program, and you can download it right onto your iPad if you have one of these at home. Otherwise, you can go onto the computer and access it through there. Now, the first thing we're going to need to do is actually start a new project, and we're going to do a 3D design. Now it's going to take a couple of seconds for this to load in, but once it does, we get a really nice little grid here. Now the first thing we're going to design is a spacer. A spacer does exactly what it says it does. It's going to act as a little bit of a cushion between the insert and the pot here. This will allow for the water to drain and then evaporate out the sides of the insert. Very useful little piece of kit and super easy to design. Let's go ahead and get started with that just by grabbing this ring and putting it into the center of our little grid here. Now we get a whole bunch of options on the right. You can always toggle this menu by pressing the little arrow here up and down to see all the information. Now putting it up, we can put it away for a moment here. If I had a keyboard hooked up to this, I would be able to hold control right now and grab one of the corners, and this will allow me to equally pull this out. Now, for what we're doing, the measurement we need to know is the bottom of our pot here. Once we find that out, we can actually print this and kind of make it whatever size we need. So getting back to our tablet here, we have our little ring in the center, and what I'm going to do is just create another ring. And I'm going to go right above it and pull it over. Now I know right now this looks a bit ridiculous because it is, and it's not very symmetrical. I know that. We're going to correct all that in a moment. I'm going to show you how. But right now, we're just going to get a generic idea. And what I'm going to say is I'm going to ask the bottom here. And again, you won't have to do this if you hold control, but I'm not. So we're going to do it this way. We're going to have this at 100 millimeters. And sometimes it asks you to do it twice. I've had this happen a couple of times. It's annoying. But there you go. And then we're going to click this side here. And we're going to do 100 here as well. Now, I'm not going to show you that every single time now that I've shown you how I'm going to make everything kind of symmetrical in terms of size. But if we actually want to make the two rings symmetrical, what we need to do is actually select both of them at the same time. And what we do is we can double tap on the screen with our pen. Now you can see this nice little grid here. And what we're going to do is just press the center and the center. And now the eye is in the middle, and you can see it's kind of oval, and it's because we haven't corrected its shape yet. Let's go ahead and do that real quickly. We're gonna make this 40 and 40. If we really wanna make this symmetrical, because we know the outside is 100, we can do this one at 50. All right, and now again, we're gonna double tap the area, select both of these guys, and we're just gonna make sure that they're in the center. Now these are pretty thick too. We don't need them this thick. So what we're gonna do is select the outside first. We're gonna bring down the options menu, and then we're gonna select sides. Let's up the sides up a little bit. And then we're gonna go to the wall thickness, and we're gonna bring that right down. Okay, now keep this in mind. The thinner this is, the quicker it will 3D print. However, if you want some structural integrity, you need to make sure it has some thickness too. So there's a little bit of give and take here. I'm gonna use a slightly thinner wall, but I'm also going to provide some supports there, and that should be okay for what we need. Let's go ahead and just make sure that we got this in the right spot. I think so. And we're going to do the same thing with this wall here. And let's up the sides. And let's go ahead and take that wall thickness down. Now, if I want to take this one that I've already made, what I can do is I can actually copy and place, and that will make exactly the same object on top of it. So in this case, we have two rings sitting on top of each other. Now I'm going to make the one in there a little bit smaller, and I'm going to try to be as good as I can about dragging this. It's all not too bad. And we're going to do that. And again, we're going to take all three of these, and we are just going to make them symmetrical. So now we got 3 little rings here, and if I want to be really picky, I can go through and actually just use the same ring all over. And we actually should probably do that because there's probably a lot of people already screaming that that's not symmetrical. And I completely understand where you're coming from, but I have ADHD and I move quickly. So let's go ahead and just take this one. We'll delete it real quickly. I'll take the outside one, copy and place. We'll shrink her down, and we will then move that a little bit more, just about there. Okay. And then we're going to double tap the sides here. We're going to make these guys all kind of line up, and look at that. It looks beautiful. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a square here. And the reason why we're using square is because they are a lot easier to manipulate and do what we need to do with them. We're actually going to turn this square here into a rectangle. Let's take away the options box there. We're going to go just about here. Actually, let's make it a little bit smaller. Yeah, that looks good. And we're going to just bring us in. Very good. And now what we're going to do is copy and place. And we're going to shift this on the clock like this. We're going to select these 2 guys and the outer ring. So 1, 2, 3. And now we're going to line all of that up. No, okay, I didn't line up the way I wanted to. So let's select everything here. And let's just see if we can get everything to line up the way I want it to. Yeah, that looks great. Now this looks huge, and it is. We're going to correct that now though. So let's go ahead and bring any of these guys here. And if you look in the center, you'll see a little white dot. That guy there is how high we're going to make this. Now, I don't think we need anything more than 3 millimeters high, but if you need something higher, go ahead and make it a little bit thicker. Just keep in mind, the taller it is, the more print time we're going to have. So let's shrink this down here. We're going to bring it right to the rim of the other ones. And again, right there to the rim. Looking good. Now what we're going to do is we're going to group all of this. Okay? Take this and we're going to group it. This creates one object. So now when we move this, it's one big thing. And if we want to tilt it, turn it, shrink it, it's going to move as one solid object. Super important to know for later. Now, before we move on to the next step, what we need to do is actually make some drainage holes. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the round roof here. We're going to stretch it out a little bit. Same thing as we kind of did before with the X, and pull it out a little bit more. That looks good to me. And same thing as before. What we're going to do is we're kind of tilt it here on an axis. Let's see if we can actually get these 2 guys to be symmetrical again. Okay, there we go. And now I'm going to grab the center here. We're going to copy and place. And we are going to just move this on the clock. Now, these 2 guys we're going to now turn into holes, just like this. By selecting them and then pressing the hole option, what we're doing is we're going to actually make holes through that solid object that we have here in the center. But that will only happen once we group everything together. So let's go ahead and bring this down and double check our image here to see if everything is good. Now these look actually a little bit too big, so we're going to shrink them down a little bit. I'm going to delete one of them so I don't have to do this once. And I'm going to go back to here. This is where it gets a little bit trickier because we've already tilted this. It becomes a little bit of a pain in the butt to make it a little bit smaller. I don't think I actually need to make the channels so much bigger. Oops, I'm going to go back. I didn't mean to do that. Grabbing the triangle at the top actually changes the pitch on the Z-axis. So if you wanted to raise something up higher, you would grab that triangle. In this case here, we want to grab that little tiny guy there, and we want to bring it down. I think that actually looks pretty good at a 7. And now what we want to do is just line that up again, copy and place, and we'll move it around again, just like that. Okay, so now we have this pretty much ready to go. Let's select everything together and we will group it. And with that, we're actually completely done our spacer here. And like I said earlier, we can make this bigger, smaller, and we can even shrink the size down a little bit if we want to make it a little bit less hunkier there in the middle for print time. But now that we got our spacer finished, we need to move into that insert. Now the insert is designed by knowing how deep our pot is and also knowing how wide our pot is. You want our pot to have a little bit of room on all sides so that water can evaporate. And we also want to make sure that our insert has holes on the bottom of it, just like this, so the water can freely drip out too. Now with those two concepts in mind, we can put this down and begin designing this here. Now I'm going to design a generic one, but you can design whatever one you need to at home based on this information here. Okay, now let's get into our CAD here, and what we're going to do is take a cylinder. This cylinder has edges, and you can actually go and search for a smooth cylinder if you want that inside of the search function. But for right now, we're going to use this. And what we're going to do is make this nice and big so we can see what we're doing. And that looks pretty good to me. We're also going to bring this up so now that you can see this. Okay, that actually looks pretty good. Yeah, that will do for right now. And let's go ahead and crease the sides here just because, you know, I like things to look a little bit better. All right, so we have our cylinder. Now what we're going to do is we're going to paste in place and we're going to make that one a hole. And you'll see a kind of weird little design here happening. Don't worry, everything's fine. We're gonna raise it up using that Z-axis we talked about earlier. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna shrink this. Now the important part of this, and then it's actually a lot easier to do if you have a little keyboard here to be able to do this part, is you wanna be able to shrink the interior part by 5%. The thing is that this part here doesn't necessarily have to be waterproof because, again, this is kind of like the drainage of your plant. That being said, though, you still need to have structural integrity, so making sure that the pot is thick enough to be able to hold the weight of your plant is also something to keep in mind. But again, thicker things means longer print time, so keep that in mind too. Now what I'm going to do here is shrink this and try to get a wall that's about 3 millimeters thick, and that should be more than enough for what we need. So let's take this here. I think even 2 millimeters, you should be pretty good here, depending on the PLA especially. Okay. And now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to highlight both of these, and again, we're just going to line them up in the center. So now that we have the hole and the actual sphere all nice and lined up, what we can do is actually lower this. Now keep in mind, when we were playing with that Z-axis, you saw a measurement there. When we go to 0, or I should say right here at the bottom, that bottom number there, when that goes to 0, that tells you that you are on the plane. You are on that 0 axis right there, level with the cylinder. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go from level, which is 0, and we're going to raise it up by 2. Okay. If you want this to be thicker for stronger stuff, raise it by a couple of more. You can do 4, 5, even more. Whatever works for you in this case is really the best way of doing this. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to leave it at 2 millimeters. So our walls are 3 millimeters and our bottom is 2 millimeters. Okay. You know what? Let's just go ahead and make it symmetrical. I was fooling you. I know some of you guys were getting ready to go in that comment section. I'm just kidding. So let's go ahead and raise it just 1 more millimeter up. There you go. 3 millimeters. And now what we're going to do is copy this, make it one big group, and now we have our hole. We basically have a garbage can at this very moment in time. And the next thing we need to do is create some drainage holes. Now you can do this in any way you want things. What we're going to do is we're actually going to put a little hole here on the side, a cylinder hole. And then what we're going to do is we're going to make it a little bit smaller. So let's go, all right, 5 by 5. Now that we have this guy, what we're going to do is select him and we're going to do paste in place. And we're going to move this one just over by, let's move it over by, yeah, about 8 millimeters should be enough. And then we're going to do that again. And when we press the button again, it's going to place another cylinder exactly the same distance as the one we put prior to it. We're going to do that a couple more times, just like that. All right, now that we got this line here, a little bit of a cutaroo there, we're going to go ahead and copy and we're going to paste and we're just going to move it one over. And then we're going to do that again and again and again, just like that. Awesome. Now from here, we can actually create a design if we want to, just by deleting these guys here one by one. And you can get a nice little design that way. If you don't want to do it this way, you can always just paste these as you go. There's nothing wrong There's no wrong way of doing this. This is completely up to you and how you choose to design. Now let's take this off here. Let's shave this off here. There we go. That looks cool. Now I'm going to take this design. I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to bring it over here. And you can see that we have this. We can place our holes or even our cylinder anywhere we want. And once we have it where we like it, we can then take our little assembly group here. But let's go ahead and group that so it's easier to deal with these guys. Let's group these guys together. There we go. Bring this guy back over. So now that when we grab these little holes, we're grabbing them as one group instead of just grabbing one of them. That's a really annoying thing to deal with. Okay, now that we got these, let's do this. We're gonna do the same thing, copy and place. We're gonna shift, we're gonna move it 90 degrees, and we're gonna move it over. And we're gonna keep it on the same plane, or at least the best to our ability. Okay, there we go. So now you get this little look here, and we can go in now and select these and tell them to ungroup, and we can delete the ones that we don't like. Get rid of no, you can stay. Get rid of you. We'll get rid of you. Move the cylinder out of here. We'll get rid of you and you. Okay, now that we have our dot matrix kind of the way we want it, let's go ahead and select these guys all together. Just like that. Make sure that they're all selected. That's super important. We're going to group them together. Now it creates a kind of group of holes. And let's move them around so we can see they all stay together. They do, so that means they all got selected. Very good. We can take our bucket here. We can move it right now into the best of our center. Now again, we can always select the two just like this. Grab these guys like this. Grab this right here. Boom, boom. There's our center. Now we can take a look in the middle and see if everything's okay. Everything looks great here. So now we are ready to basically group these two guys together. Okay, that actually looks really good. We got our Swiss cheese and a unique pattern there at the bottom. Now this is a very simple insert. You can do a whole bunch of unique things to this to add to it to make it even better for your plant. But this is just an introductory to how to design something simply inside of a CAD program. Now let's get to our last project, which is designing a flower pot. All right, time for our last little project of the day, our flower pot. Now, when it comes to 3D printing and flower pots, there's a few things you kind of have to keep in mind. Water is your enemy. And believe it or not, water is the most patient element on Earth. It will wait for thousands, if not millions of years to be able to penetrate different kinds of rocks. So if water can beat rock, your PLA is in for a hell of a battle. And we can do some things to kind of prevent leakage. One way is to make really super thick walls. Another way would be to spray the inside or coat the inside with something to try to keep it from, dilapidating over time. PLA is something you kind of want to avoid when it comes to flower pots too, as if they're in the sun, they do tend to warp and melt. You definitely want to use something a little stronger, like a PETG or ABS. But at the end of the day though, just keep in mind where this is going and choose the appropriate filament for that area. All right, let's get back to our little pot here. So with the understanding that we need some thick walls, we can pretty much make a pot out of anything. This is a design I imported from Things, but of course you can import anything that you like, or you can even create your own, which we'll go over in a minute about how to kind of come up with an idea for that. Looking at this right here though, if we wanted to make this a flower pot, the first thing we need to do is size this appropriately. Now, of course, like I said before, I don't have the keyboard hooked up at the moment, so I'm going to do a little rough sketch here. This is going to look ridiculous. I'm fully aware, but when we print it out, it'll look completely different. Right now, we're going to do this, flathead rock, and we're going to make it a little bit bigger. That actually looks pretty good. Now, understanding when we click the sides here, we can see a measurement. In this case here, it's telling us the front there is 74 millimeters across. If your printer bed is 300 millimeters or 200 millimeters, this is a good understanding about how big this is going to be. Of course, you can just know the measurement and understand how big it's going to be, but if you need something to see, a reference, you can just look over at your printers and get the idea. Now, I'm going to make this a little bit bigger and a little bit taller. just like that. Awesome. Now we need to make this flat, but we're gonna need to put something at the bottom of this to make it stand the way we want it to, because right now his head is flat, and if I was to tilt it back, it would look a little bit weird. I'll show you what I mean. So we'll take this here real quickly, we'll put it down, and you can see now his head is facing up. And if we wanted to put flowers in there, it kind of goes in a weird spot of his head. It doesn't really work, right? So we're gonna have to make a base, and that's super easy to do with the whole bunch of really cool shapes we have here on the right-hand side. We're gonna flip his head back over to where it was before. We're gonna raise it up a little bit, and we're gonna leave it like that for right now. Let's go over to that little hole, that little cylinder there. We're just gonna make the cylinder as big as we want to have the pot. We want the cylinder to be big enough to be able to hold our plant. So think about the plant you're putting into this. This is gonna be the hole for the insert to go into, okay? So we're gonna take this, bring it over. Now in this case here, you can see I have a bit of an oval here, because again, we're not playing with the control button. We're gonna bring this up, and we're gonna see where on the rock's head that we have this currently going. We're gonna make this a little bit smaller, bring it in the middle there, and actually that doesn't look too bad. Let me see here. That looks pretty good. And so now what we need to do is just put the hole here. I'm going to actually make this have a little bit of a platform, so I can put something like this inside of the pot. So what I'm going to do is bring this up a little bit, just so I can see the actual damage that I'm doing here. Okay, so let's bring this right about here. Zoom out and bring it down into the rock's head. And right now we are sitting, that's pretty good. I like that. We're gonna keep that right now, okay? So we're gonna take this, again, group it together, and now we're gonna create a hole in the rock's head. And boom, just like that, we pretty much have our pot ready to go. With that hole there, we can use that insert from earlier, place it in there, and maybe put a little guy like this inside. All right, now that looks pretty good. Like I said, we have to put a base on that. That could just be like a simple little square there. We can bring that out here. And again, you can do whatever you want. I'm just kind of giving you an idea of how easy it is to make your very own at home. Of course, you could always find a better bust of the rock if you wanted to follow this as well. This is just the one that I'm using. But what happens if you wanted to create your own pot? Well, I think it could be done fairly easily. Let's go ahead and just start a new one, and I'll show you the basics, and we'll take all this stuff and throw it onto the printer. Now, if you think about this from earlier, you saw that we actually took multiple pieces and sometimes took details and copied them multiple times to create something new. We're going to do the same thing here. Now, we could just take a simple cylinder here and create about the right size and then just add a whole bunch of detail on. And that's what we're going to do, but in a different way than you might think. What we need to do first is understand how big of a pot we want to make. It's not going to be anything crazy in this case here. We're just going to show you something simple. So I'm going to go like this. The next thing to understand is what kind of a look you're going for. Are you going for something simple and smooth, or do you want to have something a little bit more complicated? In this case here, I want some panels. So having these edges like this actually makes this a lot easier for me to understand how many different edges I'm going to need. Now, designing each one of these individually is a pain in the butt, and I highly don't recommend doing that. And instead, what I recommend doing is designing it once and then copying it and putting it into multiple places. Let me show you how we do that. So if this is our pot here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a square, I'm going to bring it out, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line it up, and what we're going to do is we're going to size it up, okay? Okay, once we have the right measurement, we can bring that out, and now we have something to work with. We have a side, and what we can even do with this, if it makes it even easier for us to work with, is lay this down flat, okay? Bring it right down, layer flat. All right. Now we can add whatever we want onto this one panel. Bring them up. There we go. We got a nice little design there going down the middle, and it looks pretty good. I actually almost want one more. You know what? Actually, let's take that away. And let's put something else there. Yeah, the pill right there. That works. Okay. Let's take this, we'll rotate it like that. Make it a little smaller. Put it right in the middle. We'll select all these details here and we're gonna line them up so they all look nice and pretty. That actually looks kind of cool. Okay, so now that we got this panel here, what we can do is we can actually select all of them like we did earlier, and we can group them all together. So now it's one solid unit, and we can stand this back up just like this. Okay, raise her back up, bring her over. All right, we're lined up. We can select both these guys here and we're going to group them together. Oops, we're gonna group them together. There we go. Now that we have this grouping, what we can do is we can paste in place and we can shift until we see them go right next door. And then we'll do the same thing over and over again until we have them all in place. Now it might look a little bit off at the moment, but don't worry, everything will work out just fine, okay? As long as you stay on the same plane, everything should be fine. Select all this together. And again, we're gonna group it. Sometimes when you have something this big, it takes a little bit of time for everything to group together. But once it does, oops, we'll go back. Select there. Okay, there we go. We finally got everything in there. And now you can see that we have a really cool looking pot. Now to make that hole for the center, we go back to basic shapes. We grab that little cylinder there, that nice little hole shape, make it a little bit bigger, and of course, make it a lot taller than the original pot that we want. There we go. And we can kind of match whatever we want for the outside thickness. Now, again, I always recommend using the actual measurements to do this, but because we're doing this kind of quick and dirty today, we're gonna do it like these and like these. Yeah, that looks great. Okay, so let's take our little guy here, bring it down to 0 level. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm gonna leave 4 there, and that should be good. Okay, now my walls, they need to be thicker if I'm just gonna 3D print this. However, I'm actually gonna spray mine on the inside, so it should be completely sealed. So with that understanding, having the 4mm thickness on the bottom, this should be pretty good. It should be more than good. It should be almost bulletproof with that 4mm bottom. Okay, let's go ahead and group these guys together. And now that we have our pot made, let's take everything to the 3D printer and see how it turns out. And boom, there we have it. All of our designs printed out and ready to use. We have our spacer here that we developed to go inside of the bottom of a pot where there might be some edges that don't allow for proper venting of the moisture that can build up inside. That can lead to all kinds of root rot, which is no bueno for any of your plants. Our spacer only takes about 30 minutes to print, but of course, making it bigger will add time to that, and making it smaller will take that time away. If you are planning on making this smaller, just make sure that it's thick enough. I did find that if you make it too small, the edges don't really work out. This one here is pretty thin. It looks about 4, maybe 5 layers thick. So if you go much thinner than this, you might run into some issues where this will break apart. Outside of that though, it works extremely well. And because we can customize the design inside here, you can pretty much put anything in there as long as it has some kind of drainage. All right, now our little insert here turned out pretty good too. Now this was a basic insert. There's many different designs out there and a lot better ones than this one here. If you wanted to make this a little bit quicker to print, you could actually make this kind of like an ice cream cone with a little bit of a reduced bottom here and with the holes coming out on all sides. There's a lot of pots out there that kind of mimic hydroponic pots, and those work extremely well too. This one's just a very easy one here, and again, I wanted you to be able to do this with minimum knowledge of Tinkercad. Overall though, if we take our pot, it actually fits perfectly inside and allows for the drainage and venting that we were talking about earlier. Now we move on to our pot. This looks great. I really like this. It came out so good, and because we can customize one of those panels and do pretty much anything we want to it, I'm pretty sure we can get some wicked looking little pots here. If you design one of these pots from this video today, do me a favor, use the hashtag GrooveBuilders. I would love to be able to see your work and share it across our social media pages. Overall, this is a nice thick pot and definitely will be ready to hold any kind of thing we try to put into it. Of course, of the size of the pot. With some of the newer updates in Tinkercad, they've made it even easier for us to be able to make some of these panels. And with a whole bunch of shapes and of course some patterns that you could even use in coding, you can make some really awesome stuff. I can't wait to fool around a little bit more with the Tinkercad update to see exactly what I can do and what kind of cool intricate patterns I might be able to pull off. Finally, we have Dwayne the Pot Johnson. And this turned out really well too. I actually only had one failed support here, and that was on the left side, its little ear here. Luckily though, because of how this head was designed by the original creator, which I'll put down in the description below, it really didn't need that many supports. And while the one that did have the support turned out really nice and liquid smooth, the other side here was very easy to clean up. The hole on the inside here is nice too. I maybe should have increased the amount of surfaces on the inside here to allow for an easier fit of an insert. And of course, the size of this one really only allows for a succulent. If you want to see what kind of plant I actually end up putting inside of Dwayne the Pot Johnson, go ahead and check us out on Instagram. We post all kinds of cool projects there every single day from creators just like you, including cool mechanisms and 3D printing tips as well. But getting back to Dwayne the Pot Johnson, knowing that we can take pretty much any 3D model and put a nice little hole in it to make a pot is a great little thing. This print took just over 14 hours and probably could be a little bit denser, but overall it will be able to do what it needs to do. Hold a insert just like this for a small plant, most likely a succulent, which will leave for a very interesting looking pot. Groovers, I hope you enjoyed designing and creating with me today. And if you did, do me a favor, press that like button down below. And if you're new here, hit subscribe as well, as we've got all kinds of cool projects and I would love to have you here with us in the future. Until next time, keep building. All right, Dwayne the Pot Johnson, what do you think about succulents? I think it could be a nice little furry head. You think? Cactus, maybe?